From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters. How is your pandemic bread baking going? Do you remember the great yeast and flour shortage of spring 2020?
For some reason, baking bread has become a big thing. Flour has been flying off the shelves and is being kneaded into dough by novice bakers across the country.
There was a time when you could not scroll through Instagram without seeing someone's lockdown sourdough starter or a freshly baked loaf. Stress eating has always been a thing, but personally speaking, this pandemic has helped me confirm that I stress cook. So it has been interesting to see our collective psyches during this pandemic through what we cook and eat, and one of the best places to do that has been at our local grocery store. In the past 8 months, our shopping habits and diets have changed. Mostly because we've been home more, but also because many of us use food to satiate far more than just filling up an empty stomach. That's the lens that Karon took, writing a piece that examined how our shopping habits have changed and how grocery stores are adapting. Karon is a Toronto-based culture reporter for the Toronto Star and formerly the resident food writer and recipe tester. He's here to tell us what he found out. Thanks so much for being back on This Matters, buddy.
Hi, Raju.
So I love this piece. There were so many great little tidbits that I'm going to unpack with you, but let's start at the very beginning, sir. How are your yeast supplies? Are you still baking bread? That was super hot off the top, but it feels like it's cooled. So let's start there. And also, if it has cooled, why?
My yeast supply has been pretty steady in that I always have instant yeast at home, but I rarely bake. I'm not much of a baker, but I just have it just in case. I think that people's baking habits, the ones who've taken it up during the pandemic, has kind of cooled as we entered the summer months. It got quite hot to turn on an oven for an hour or two. And I think as time went on, our appetites for things have changed. In the early March and April, it was cold. We were still relying on a lot of imported produce. Supermarkets were still trying to fill up the shelves and catch up with demand. So that level of scarcity made us all want to make our own food because we were unsure about our food supplies. And then as we head into the later months, June, July, and August, the shelves started to fill up again. Ontario produce was coming in, and we were a lot less freaked out by what we were seeing in terms of our food supply. So I think because of that, a lot of people, including myself, didn't really feel the need to all of a sudden make our own food as much. And I think because of the summer months, people want to go outside, get some takeout, go to the picnic,
Barbecue.
Park and barbecue and stuff like that. Yeah, it's like that every year. And I don't think that this is much of an exception in terms of what we're craving as the weather changes and the seasons change.
Absolutely. But I think the interesting thing here is what your piece did is take a look at some of our psychological sort of food responses to a very topsy-turvy event, this pandemic. One of the things in the piece is that right off the top, people obviously were cooking at home more, but one of the people point out that people were trying more complex recipes. Why do you think that was?
Right. So in the beginning, when there was so much uncertainty, I think a lot of people referred back to the comfort foods, the pantry staples, the stuff that they knew how to make and the stuff that their family has been making. A lot of shelf-stable stuff using pantry staples that were affordable and lower priced because, again, early on in March, April, May, we had no idea what was happening. And we didn't know what our job status was going to be like, myself included. So I was just saving money as much as possible and just, eating beans and eating a lot of rice and pantry staples and stuff. And of course, pretty soon you kind of get tired of eating that stuff and cooking the same stuff over and over again. And so as you head into the summer months, Ontario produce is in full swing. There's so much more available. And you're also like, okay, I can't eat the same stuff that I have been eating for the last 3 months. I gotta try something else. If I'm going to be cooking for the next however long, I'm going to expand my repertoire a bit, People get into a cooking rut, or if they're not really experienced in the kitchen, those last 3 months, they probably picked up a lot more skills, are a lot more confident in the kitchen, and are like, hey, you know what? March, April, May, I've been really honing in on my cooking techniques. I know how to cook a piece of meat now. I know how to rehydrate beans. What's the next step? I think I'm ready for more complicated stuff. Recipe blogs and cooking websites and stuff like that. I'm learning a lot more about food. Hey, summer's rolling in. Now's a good time to try more complex dishes.
The other thing, I think it was Tina Chen from TNT who made this great point about, the fact that we can't travel now and how some of us are trying to recreate those experiences. Jamaican patties or something in my house that absolutely we started to make just to try and remember some nice times when we've been there, right? So I thought that was also a really, really interesting point.
You're making Jamaican patties?
Dude, my kid got a recipe at a cooking camp a couple of years ago. It's really easy.
Yeah. Well, at this point, because people are going out more, I would have just bought a box of the frozen ones. But good for you.
I think that this is one of these things, too. Look, let's do the flip side of this. So obviously there are people who learned how to cook and took advantage of this. But, one of the other trends that exploded was meal kits and stuff like that as more people cooked at home. And obviously I would think that, one of the reasons there is that so many restaurants were closed off top. So even takeout wasn't an option, really. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, early on, a lot of restaurants were still trying to figure out what to do. And I wrote about takeout and delivery apps early on during the pandemic. And the frustration that a lot of restaurants had was that a lot of their survival would be dependent on takeout. But a lot of restaurants that didn't do takeout before, their food didn't really translate well to, sitting in a container steaming for 30 minutes on the back of a bike. So a lot of them sold meal kits instead so that the food could be freshly prepared at home and eaten a few minutes afterwards. So because of that, meal kits have really, really taken off in the last months. In addition to like the traditional services like HelloFresh and Chef's Place and stuff like that, they also saw like a huge resurgence after, the last few years. We were all kind of wondering, when is the whole meal kit thing going to end? But because of the pandemic, they've definitely seen a lot more resurgence and coming in different forms, being made up by the restaurants themselves rather than these meal kit companies.
We'll be right back. Let's talk about all of sort of the big trends in your piece, because I think that some of them make sense, but some of them are a little bit weird. Fewer trips, bigger purchases, more veggies and frozen foods, and the big one, I think, is online shopping.
Thousands of small businesses have closed due to the coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. But one sector that's seen exceptional growth is online grocery delivery.
I think this last one is huge because, I was the guy who's like, no, I'm not going to do that. I want to go feel the produce. I want to see my produce and buy my meat and look at it. And listen, I'm using Instacart now. I just told my parents as numbers are spiking, I don't want them going to the grocery store, and I will make that order for them. This, I think, has got to have been the breakthrough for these guys. Yes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Joseph Longos, he was saying that all the trends that were kind of in their infancy pre-COVID have just basically skyrocketed, and e-commerce being one of them. But the funny thing is, I think I'm in one of the very few families that haven't done any online grocery shopping throughout these last 7 months because I live fairly close to a Chinese grocer, and I can honestly just walk there, or it's a 5-minute drive from my mom. And yeah, my mom doesn't believe in e-commerce shopping when it comes to groceries. So we have not done any e-commerce shopping.
Listen, Karon, it was actually a fight with my parents this weekend because I was like, listen, I don't want you to go because I'm worried. And they still want to do it, right? Obviously, they don't believe in this stuff either. So we haven't yet, but this week is going to be the first time. So we're making the grocery list. I think the interesting one here, too, though, is the fewer trips and the bigger purchases. I mean, this is just a fear about contamination, you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, like it's a risk of exposure, right? We're still in that state where anytime you go out of your house and into another enclosed space, there's still a risk of infection. So it makes sense that you want to lower that risk by going to these public places less often. And because of that, you're going to have to buy more to sustain you for, a week or two. But I think at this point, most people are kind of buying for the week rather than the 2 weeks now.
I think the other interesting one here, and they sort of go together, people are buying more veggies and frozen foods as people are sort of cooking more. And you had a professor of agriculture saying that there's going to be less pre-processed food. Now, doesn't that seem a little bit counterintuitive in that you have meal kits? Yes, we are cooking at home, but why does he think there's going to be less pre-processed food in our diets or people buying them?
Well, I think part of it is just people are cooking a lot more. So when you're cooking, you're more inclined to use, fresh veggies and like meats and the stuff from like the peripherals of the supermarket, right? The stuff on the outside aisles where all like the produce, the dairy section, the bread section, and the frozen section are. On the inside, it's kind of more of like the snacks and stuff like that. And I think people will continue to buy snacks, but maybe it's not as much of a priority for them, whether it's because of budget or because people are like, you know what, I'm not moving around as much. I'm not going to be in the office. I don't need as much snacks because I'm not moving around as much. Yeah, I think people's priorities have been changed, and they don't need as many convenience foods because so many of them are just cooking from scratch at home now.
Let's talk about the economics. If you got your gig, now you probably weathered sort of the badness now. However, there's going to be waves going forward. One of the gentlemen quotes in line is, the economics of the meat counter are going to be challenging. Why is that?
Well, beef prices were higher this year. And I think when people are looking at their grocery budgets and trying to, stretch out their dollar, usually the first thing that goes is snacks and like candies and stuff like that. And then the second is also meat and looking for more affordable means of protein. So sometimes that's like chicken or tofu, seitan, like legumes, things like that. That's just usually how the way it is. And the plant-based protein trend, whether it's Beyond Meats, whether it's tofu, it has always been gaining momentum over the years and not just through this pandemic. So I think we're seeing a continuation of that. Just people looking for more affordable proteins because of the uncertainties of the economy, or, they're already out of a job, and looking for more alternative means of nutrition. And I think now we're also a lot more aware of our food systems and what it means for the environment. So I think a lot of people realize that cattle farming is very detrimental to the environment. So they're probably cutting down on meat consumption as well. In our family, we've definitely cut down on beef in the last few years. I honestly can't remember the last time I cooked with beef.
This is just the barbecue season, right? This is the other thing. You talked about the fact that the seasonal...
We actually didn't even grill any beef. I just realized that.
I've been grilling a lot, and I think this is the thing too. As we enter fall, what do you think the trends are going to be? It sounds like we've dealt with the scarcity issue, which is a good thing, but do you think there's going to be any runs on things?
No one has a crystal ball, right? The people that I spoke to for the article, a lot of them are optimistic. Part of it, I think, is just because it's their job to assure customers that things are going to be A-okay. I think produce will continue to be a number one seller as the seasons change and things get colder and Ontario's relying more on imports as we head into the fall and winter months. It will be interesting to see whether it can keep up with supply needs. Everyone that I talked to said that it should be fine. There's no worries. And if things like the wildfires in California are affecting imports, then there are other areas of the US and other countries that Ontario and Canada can look to if needed.
How else is the in-store experience changing? One of the interesting things that you sort of said in the piece is that, one, there's going to be sort of less products coming from companies that make a lot of pre-processed things. So I think that's an interesting sort of product shift from the manufacturers. But then the other thing is like the way that they sell these things is through samples. And that's got to be gone, right? So, what's changing in the stores?
I haven't seen it specifically, but the marketing prof that you're referring to, he thinks that because supermarket samples aren't really a thing now or aren't as popular as they were before, companies kind of have to figure out a way for customers to be able to sample products. That's not the old way of, an employee cutting up like a granola bar or like pouring out stuff into a cup, because now people don't want to risk cross-contamination or getting very close to the employee serving the food. So there might be more prepackaged, smaller, quote unquote, fun size portions of foods being sold now, so that, if a supermarket wants to hand out samples of them, they can just kind of rip open the bag or the box and like pour all like the individually wrapped snacks into a bowl and have that being handed out rather than opened up and cut up and served that way.
Does this change your habits at all? I mean, you said the store's 5 minutes away, so no?
I think there's two eras of grocery shopping within the pandemic. The first is the March, April, May era, when people were, genuinely stocking up on 2 week supplies and going once a week and having to line up for like 20 minutes, half an hour outside the supermarket and just white knuckling the whole experience and just being super, super nervous and just being on very high alert. And then the next phase is kind of the June, July, August / now period when, people are still on high alert and still being more cautious. But I think we now know a lot more about the virus and its transmissions, and that transmission by touching a surface isn't as high risk as, being in close proximity with someone. So the shopping experience for me has definitely really changed. Now, when I go to a supermarket, I don't feel as tense as I was back in, March and April. I'm still, cautious of things, right? I have my mask on. I'm using hand sanitizer. I'm washing my hands. I'm not willy-nilly touching everything. I'm only touching something if I'm going to buy it. But I think now, as we quote unquote settle into the normal, we're kind of adjusted to things and accepting that, like, okay, this is how things are going to be for the next little while. So there's no use in panicking. Let's just be smart about this, be considerate of the people around us, and carry on about our day and try to get our stuff and leave.
Well, I mean, with numbers spiking as they seem to be right now, I mean, we've already seen certain jurisdictions shut down indoor dining again. So I could see that happening very soon again here, which I think will only once again fuel the grocery market. I mean, any trends? Pumpkin spice? Is everybody going to be making pumpkin spice stuff at home soon?
Pumpkin spice latte. High five it. Put a little cinnamon in there. Throw a little nutmeg in too. It's a pumpkin-y swirl onto a beautiful, beautiful beverage. I love it.
Well, I actually dropped by a Dairy Queen over the weekend, and they did have pumpkin pie Frosties. So I don't think anything can kill the pumpkin spice trend. That would always be in there. But as we head into fall and winter, with every year, baking is going to pick up again, right? Because it's going to be cold. People want something warm and comforting, and baking will always be a number one thing. It might see another spike because of the pandemic and more people are going to be staying in and wanting some sort of comfort food. But I don't think that we're going to see the same shortages of flour and yeast and baking ingredients that we saw back in March and April, because a lot of the retailers, by now, they're able to calculate the demand. They see how many people are baking. They know how much more to stock. The producers now know how much will go to retailers and how much will go to restaurants. Because back in March and April, it really caught everyone off guard. Supermarkets weren't used to all these people coming in and cooking from home. For like the last few years, they were like, okay, we know that in a given week, this is how much stuff are being sold. But when the pandemic hit, like no one ate out, no one ordered takeout, everyone was cooking. So of course, supermarkets weren't able to keep up with the demand and have enough stuff in storage. But 7 months later, a lot of them are kind of in their groove now and have worked out the relationship with their suppliers and producers to be able to keep the shelves stocked, even if there's going to be a second wave and, more people staying at home.
Let's hope so. I mean, I'm definitely going to be getting into soup making very, very soon. Karon, this has been really, really great for us. I really want to thank you for your time.
All right. No problem. My pleasure.
Karon Liu is a Toronto-based culture reporter for The Star. He's our former food writer and recipe tester. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Rajin Budler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.